and welcome to the LLG Grapevine podcast. You're listening to Helen McGrath, Head of Public Affairs, and Dennis Hall, LLG Bulletin Editor.
Hi, everyone.
Well, it's been quite a weekend for the government with ethics high on the agenda. Dennis, what can you tell us about ethical governance?
Well, Helen, you're dealing with the Nadawi case in our vlog, but let me address the wider ethical picture. A major new report from the Committee on Standards in Public Life was published last week, together with a series of questions that public sector leaders need to address. Here's more on this. Lord Evans, chair of the Committee on Standards in Public Life, has written an open letter to public sector leaders to prompt reflection and discussion on the importance of ethical leadership in the UK. The committee has published Leading in Practice, a new report which shares examples and case studies gathered from public and private sector organisations on maintaining ethical organisational practices. Lord Evans said, "The demands on public sector leaders are numerous and diverse. They are leading government departments and public bodies that are often grappling with highly complex challenges. It is a mistake to focus only upon delivery. Doing things in the right way and in the public interest is critical for public confidence in the bodies that operate on the public's behalf and supports the delivery of public services too. A robust ethical culture," he said, "supports effective risk management. If people see thinking about ethical issues as part of their job and feel safe to speak up, then this can pick up potential concerns before they escalate. A values-driven culture is also good for morale and can help attract and retain the highest caliber staff. Our evidence," he said, "shows that an ethical culture does not emerge by accident. It requires discussion and action. We recognise there is no one-size-fits-all solution," he said. And the new report shares examples of how different organisations have sought to build ethical values into their policies, practices and ways of working. The report has identified 20 questions for leaders to help them reflect upon whether there is more that they can do to support their people to think about the principles of public life and integrate them into all aspects of how their organisation operates. We want our report to prompt reflection, discussion and action, he said. Now, this is a timely report as government continues to struggle to shake off the impression that it is mired in ethical issues that it seems unable to handle and which just keep on coming.
Well, at least we now have an ethical advisor, and it seems that the PM in the case of Nadim Sahawi at least has taken some action. Now, councils are being urged to check they have adequate information sharing agreements with their service providers after one council was not able to comply with an agreed ombudsman remedy because it could not get hold of the data it needed. The London Borough of Ealing had agreed to the local government and social care ombudsman's recommendation to carry out a statutory children's services complaint investigation to remedy a complaint from one of its foster carers. But despite agreeing to carry out the review, Ealing was unable to access the data it needed from the National Fostering Agency, which arranged placements on its behalf. The NFA said it could not provide data about the children the foster carers had looked after because the foster parents did not have the right to request the information. The Ombudsman's subsequent investigation found the council had not considered that it was itself acting in locus parenti and therefore had the right to request the children's information from the agency. Michael King, the Ombudsman, said, "When councils enter into contracts with service providers, they need to ensure the different parties' responsibilities are clear from the outset. This can include areas such as complaints resolution and, as in this case, information sharing. One to ensure, therefore, that your council has in place within its contractual terms." And now for something of interest for our litigation lawyers. Dennis.
Well, let me begin with some important questions about litigation and local authorities. When can an officer conduct litigation for a local authority? And do provisions in the Local Government Act 1972 override restrictions upon carrying out reserved services? Let's look at a case that looked at this in more detail. I want to talk about the recent case of the Crown on the application of York City Council against AUH. This raises a number of important questions, but I want to focus upon the scope of Section 223 of the Local Government Act 1972 in relation to court proceedings and the interplay with the reserved services provisions in the Legal Services Act 2007. This is a topic that is often misunderstood. York City was adjudged by the Court of Appeal to have engaged improperly in reserved legal activity by conducting consumer offences litigation in the Crown Court through an officer, its head of regional investigations, who was neither authorised nor exempt for that purpose. York had used its head of regional investigations officer to run its cases in both the magistrates and Crown courts. But this highly experienced officer was neither a solicitor nor a barrister, nor otherwise an exempt person under the Legal Services Act 2007. Nonetheless, this did not invalidate the indictments or the proceedings, and it was this latter decision at first instance that led to the appeal in this case. The Lord Chief Justice noted that the conduct of litigation is a reserved legal activity under the 2007 Act. York had argued that its officer could act for it by virtue of Section 223, subsection 1 of the Local Government Act 1972. The Council further argued that it had authorised its officer to conduct the criminal proceedings, that he was therefore a party to them in the Crown Court, and so would have a right to conduct those proceedings personally. The Council said that its officer was not acting on its behalf, but rather was the Council's legal embodiment for conducting the proceedings. But the Lord Chief Justice said that this embodiment argument, if correct, would have far-reaching but unacceptable consequences for the conduct of litigation and rights of audience across the spectrum of civil and criminal proceedings in which a corporation were a party. He added that the Court of Appeal was unable to accept that paragraph 2, subparagraph 4, part A of Schedule 3 of the Legal Services Act 2007 exempts an employee of a local authority from the provisions of the Legal Services Act 2007 relating to the conduct of litigation. The Lord Chief Justice agreed, however, that Section 223 of the 1972 Act provided power to authorise individuals to prosecute or defend in magistrates' court proceedings, but no equivalent power is given by statute for the Crown Court. Lord Burnett ruled, though, that the proceedings were not a nullity because of York's error. This meant York's draft indictment was valid. The Lord Chief Justice said there was no suggestion that the defendants could not have a fair trial on account of York failing to use an authorised litigator. Now, litigation lawyers will want to take a close look at this case and review their own authorisation arrangements in light of the clarity provided by this ruling.
Turning to a little bit of news for our colleagues in Wales now. The consultation on the constitutional future of Wales is running for one further month only and is seeking views on how Wales might be governed in the future. It's an important consultation for Welsh democracy, and you have until the 28th of February to submit your response. In terms of a new bill, the Food Wales Bill was introduced on the 12th of December and is now at stage 1. The stated purpose of the bill is to establish a more sustainable food system in Wales, including establishing food goals to help deliver the bill's main policy objectives, requiring public bodies to take reasonable steps to advance the food goals, establishing a Welsh Food Commission with the objective of promoting and facilitating the advancement and achievement of the food goals by public bodies, requiring Welsh ministers to prepare and publish a national food strategy, and requiring public bodies other than the Welsh ministers to make and publish a local food plan. There's plenty to the bill and certainly gives some food for thought. Finally, the Welsh Government is also consulting on proposals to make changes to school admission appeal arrangements to include an option for appeals to be heard remotely as well as in person. The changes made permanent with appropriate amendments, some temporary arrangements put in place in response to the coronavirus pandemic. It's slightly odd to consider that England has permanent remote meetings for school admission appeal arrangements and not much else, whereas Wales, of course, have had the ability to hold remote meetings, albeit with restrictions historically, for a very long time. Now, Dennis, you've been watching the television again, haven't you?
Yes, but it led me to think, are our courts fit for purpose? And I was watching Happy Valley on BBC One when this question came into my mind. Here's why. The BBC TV series Happy Valley, with Sarah Lancashire and James Norton, makes for captivating, albeit very grim, drama. I love it. And last week saw murderous villain Tommy Lee Royce escape from a fictitious Leeds court hearing where the hapless guards and ill-prepared security officials all fell about amongst the commotion throughout the court building. All ridiculous, don't you think? It couldn't possibly happen in real life, could it? But the story prompted me to think that whilst issues like this may not occur in real life, the concerns about the fitness, suitability, and condition of courts are very real and desperate for those who use them on a daily basis. Enter now a report from the Law Society published just before Christmas about the overall fitness of our courts and court buildings. The report is in Bulletin 3. What it reveals is utterly shocking. Delays and cancellations in crumbling court buildings are leaving clients in limbo and denied access to justice, with their time and costs wasted. Over 500 solicitors were asked about their experiences in courts and tribunals, and around 64% of respondents had experienced delays in cases being heard within the past 12 months due to the state of the court. One solicitor reported that the courts are embarrassing. At Birkenhead, half the building has fallen down and the other half is closed due to asbestos. I'll come back to Liverpool in a moment. The cause is acknowledged to be a universal lack of investment over many years and across the whole country. Over 30% of court users did not feel physically safe while attending court, and 28% told the Law Society that the courts were not at all fit for purpose. Now, back to that courtroom escape on TV. Perhaps they're not so uncommon after all. The Liverpool Echo reported in early January that a man was back in custody after escaping a courtroom hearing in Liverpool. Mr. Nicholas Bunclark was sentenced to 16 months for assault before he vaulted the gate out of the unsecured dock, overcame the guards, and fled Liverpool Crown Court after a brief tussle with security officers. So, the gap between fact and fiction may not always be as great as we think. And if you have your own experiences of attending court, please share them with us.
Well, I've certainly seen a lot of bad behaviour in the civil courts as well, who are just not geared up for it. This includes a furious female defendant kicking the courtroom door off its hinges and calling the judge the worst expletive imaginable. She should have been contempted there and then, but the judge was too busy running for chambers. I digress, Dennis, but I certainly can and do sympathise with colleagues who feel far from secure at times. Now, looking ahead to May, voters in English local elections will be required to show photo ID for the first time. Of course, we all know this, but does the general public at large? Well, to address that concern, the Electoral Commission has begun a voter ID awareness campaign, which includes details of how to apply for a voter authority certificate by the 25th of April if no other forms of identification are available. Despite most of us holding some form of acceptable photo ID, there are in fact 1.9 million of us, so about 4%, who simply don't. I think the biggest worry is that if anyone turns up and has forgotten their ID, the chances of them turning around, going home and coming back again are pretty low, I would think. But previous pilots have shown that voter ID barely affects voting rates. So it will be really interesting to see how the May elections go in terms of turnout. And on that note, you can read more on the items discussed today and many more besides by going to bulletin number 3, available on the LLG website now. So it's goodbye
from me too.
Thank you for listening. Have a good week.